Hello, welcome. My name is Miriam. I'm a family therapist, and today I've got with me Renée van der Vloodt. And Renée is a psychotherapist as well, and she devoted many years of her life to understanding and working with children with a creative mind. She also produced this CD, Calm the Chaos of the Creative Mind. And thank you for being here, Renée.
It's a great pleasure, Miriam.
Right, and we are going to talk a little bit about dyslexia today, and everybody knows, most people know, that children who are dyslexic struggle with their reading, writing, spelling, but there's much more to dyslexia than that. So maybe you can explain a little bit?
There's much more to it than spelling and reading. If we just stay with the difficulties, there is the whole business of language processing in general. So, that can mean having real difficulty with absorbing the meaning of words when they're distracted or in another mindset, and also sometimes having difficulties with expressing themselves. And performance is very inconsistent. So this is what makes parents and teachers often very frustrated, because they'll say, he did it yesterday, but he's not doing it today. So, and this has very much to do with how much the child is in their daydreaming mode, in their trance mode. And added to that then, or linked to that, is struggling with concentration and paying attention. And then on a completely different area, which is unrelated and often people don't discover until much later, is the inconsistency of experiencing time. So that time management is a big difficulty, and also organisational skills can be all over the place. But then I don't want to leave this bit of what are the further repercussions without really looking at the strengths, because from my point of view, dyslexia is like a coin which has two sides, and we focus continuously on all these difficulties and the deficit model, but actually without the strengths that absolutely are completely linked. From my point of view, these children have, as it were, the keys to the kingdom of the future. We live in a very turbulent world with a lot of difficulties and problems, and we need creative thinking people to help us through into the next phase, as it were, for mankind, in my view. And a lot of the potential, there's a lot of potential in that area amongst dyslexic children. So they are very much what you would call creative thinkers. They think analogously, as it were. So they're lateral thinkers. They think out of the box. They're also very intuitive. And that's very interesting, because if you're constantly feeling that you're wrong, which is their experience of life, they stop trusting their intuition. That's a real big handicap that can become. You find a lot of dyslexics amongst actors and sportsmen and women. So, as I say, those are two sides of the same coin for me.
Also creative business people.
Most definitely. You have a very, very high percentage of entrepreneurs, dyslexic entrepreneurs. And that is because they have their own way of doing things. They don't like following instructions. So look at a dyslexic little boy putting together a Lego model. They don't need instructions. In fact,
they don't like the instructions.
They
want to do what they want to do.
No, and I'm no different. I've never in my life followed a cookery recipe. I kind of look at it. I need the picture. I've got the ingredients. Scan through it, and then I do it in my own way. And that's a very dyslexic approach.
Renée, what would you say would be the typical experience of a child with dyslexia in a mainstream school?
There are some who get there, but it's at an enormous cost. And the cost is that they are continuously feeling overwhelmed, exhausted. Sometimes it's described as having this sense that everybody's been handed a manual how to behave and what to do, but hey, why haven't I got this manual? So always on the back foot, which is incredibly exhausting. And apart from that, then of course you get a sense of feeling of inferiority, or it's a consequence of that, really, feeling inferior, feeling therefore also sometimes very isolated and alone in all of this, and a constant sense of there's something wrong with me. And of course, just to clarify, the way that we teach in mainstream schools is so sequential, it's so auditory, and we're talking about people who are visual learners, people who are experiential learners. The real world is where the dyslexic person learns. Looking, seeing, asking questions, experiencing. So playtime is an enormously important component of their learning life, and yet they're deprived of it a lot of the time.
Renée, can you say a little bit more about the effects of dyslexia on mental well-being and social interactions?
Yeah, so mentally, particularly with league tables and on pressure being ramped up for everybody, you see stress in all sorts of manifestations with these children. And it can be that they become very introspective, withdrawn, but it can also be that they have high levels of anxiety, because anxiety, as you know, is sort of linked to misusing your imagination. And if you've got an enormous imagination, so what then happens is that also they trust their feelings more than facts, and facts and feelings don't always correspond. So you get also this sense of that they're sometimes accused of being liars, because they retreat into their imaginative world, and there's no difference really with what's going on in here and what's going on out there. A little boy once said to me, if I shut my eyes, I can still see as much as when they're wide open and looking out there. So depression also, they can become quite obsessive. So there's a whole cascade of mental problems and difficulties that can come from feeling a misfit. And then of course socially, as you asked, what does that mean? What are their, let's say, short-term solutions, which then become like long-term habits? And you see everything from, on the one hand, being the class clown, trying to get attention in that way, to being a truant, and on the other hand, to becoming huge pleasers, where they stop knowing who they are and what they want, because if I just keep pleasing, I will be accepted. So there's that. And some children just disappear into their imagination completely, and they're not part of that world. They live in a sort of a parallel universe. So you can see that there's a whole scale of responses possible if we're not aware what's going on.
Renée, what do you think parents and educators could do to help a child with this profile? Does the child need help, and if so, then what could we do?
I like
what can
the way
a
that you
teacher
say,
do?
does the child need help? And that is really important for people to understand, that they're not talking about children who are deficient. This is it's the model in which they have to exist that is deficient, because it doesn't allow a space for everybody. We are talking about hugely talented people with an enormous interest and curiosity. They're gifted with curiosity. So parents can help by making sure that they get lots of needs met outside of the school place. So that the child experiences life as bigger than just school. This also means that it's helpful for parents to think about, what are we talking about? Are we constantly talking about what's your homework? How was the day? That's the last thing that the child really wants to talk about. And I'm obviously not saying don't talk about it, but minimise it. Put a cap on it. Have family dinners where we talk about something completely different than about school, the world, and things that rock their boat. Give them lots of opportunities to play, and to be alone, to process. So that also, by that I mean, try also to put than being with computers and all these electronic devices. Because if you're a real world learner, you're a 3D learner. Yeah. So again, I'm not saying don't do it, but really put these things into balance. Make sleep a priority, because these children need a whole lot more sleep than others, on the whole, of course, because they're absorbing, even when they're not seeing something, they, from everywhere they're taking in stimulation. It needs to be neutralized. They need to be putting all that stuff on the shelf. That's what happens at night. So sleep is very important. What else would I say are good tips? If you notice that your child, you start talking to the child and the child is off, make sure that you adapt your instructions, short, sharp, but also get them to feed back what they think you've said. And so not as in parrot, because they're very good at that, to just parrot, but it's still not gone in. It's only on a superficial level, the information. But they're understanding, and how are they going to do this? So make it into a conversation. Because another thing that is part of the difficulties which it affects school life and is linked to the level of stress is that their short-term memories can be very affected. It's just generally, if a child can be given opportunities to shine, if they have obvious talents in particular areas, make those areas, or look for schools where those things are not just an add-on, but a real part of the curriculum, whether that is acting or singing or sports or art.
So what would you say to parents who kind of lose patience with their kids because it takes them a long time to get organized and get through the tasks that lots of children do very easily?
Okay, well, thanks for the question, because of course it does happen, and parents need to give themselves a break because they're human. And sometimes we just get impatient. That's part of human interaction. It doesn't mean we stop loving. So it's very important that parents don't beat themselves up because they're not perfect. The first thing I always ask parents is whether there is a pain point in themselves. Does this trigger off some huge discomfort in them? What is that? Go there.
And often dyslexic parents will have dyslexic kids.
They do. And actually, as was in my case, for example, nobody ever assessed me as a parent in my childhood as being dyslexic. But through my children, I realised, oh my goodness, I'm on this continuum. And so I discovered a massive amount about myself. I could have pretended it wasn't there and that I wasn't dyslexic. But it's bonded me more with my children by realising my own pain and what my own solutions were to kind of keep going, which were perfectionism and being the very good little girl, if you see what I mean. And that didn't make it very different from my son, who was the truant. So rather than be impatient with him, understand that the origin of things is often the same. So I also would say to parents, sit down with your child every now and then and just say, the way that that we leave the home in the morning, have you noticed that we both get so stressed? I don't like it. And then the child also doesn't like it. And what could we do to help each other? So to make it something that's addressed when there's calm, with a plan. And see how we can stick to these plans. So not to have a formula and you have to behave now, because for the child, you see, when they're in their imagination in the morning, that sense of school isn't urgent. They're miles away. So it's about keeping in communication with each other and for children to realise why you might get upset.
And this is very much in line with much of what I talk about in this channel. So thank you very much.
I'm delighted.
Is there anything else you'd like to say to parents and teachers?
Yes, what I just want to emphasise really that how important it is for me to try and move away from this deficit model and to understand that we now live in a world where there are so many different ways of learning. Well, there always have been, but you know, even in this world, and measuring success. And to try as a parent and as a teacher, as an educator, to really examine, you know, do I think this child is somehow deficient? To be honest in our own attitudes, because often we bring our own perceptions. And because if we give people a true acknowledgement of who they really are, right from the beginning, they will be able to contribute in these ways that give super additivity to the rest of us.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Renée. Thank you for inviting me here and for talking to my audience.
It's a great pleasure, Miriam. As you know, I love talking about dyslexic talent.
Yeah, that was clear. So thank you, everyone. If you've enjoyed this content, please like, subscribe, share with your friends, enjoy your children. Thank you very much.